This deep dive is very topical. Obviously, it probably could have been topical for the past year, honestly. Now that like LLMs have really like changed how we do development and how we interact with code and software in general. And it took us some time to really like coalesce around like some tools and best practices that we found works well for us. And we're excited to get into it. So without much further ado, again, welcome to another Dagster Deep Dive. We're going to talk about LLMs. And for our conversation today, we're going to talk about the development cycle, some common pitfalls that we see people run into, the Dagster development practices, and our official Claude plugin. And then we're going to do a quick demo. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A widget within the webinar app, and we'll answer them towards the end. So the software development lifecycle. And at a high level, this is what we do as engineers all the time. This, of course, is like a simplified diagram, but I think it's instructive to think about how you do the work as a high level first. So we start with like a feature request or an issue. We then like make a plan on how to solve it. And then we actually do the writing of the code. We write and run some tests. Then we do some functional testing. We refactor to clean it up and improve readability, performance, security, all that type of fun stuff. We create a pull request to merge it into the main branch. And then we have someone review the code and make sure it's up to snuff. Then we push it through the CI/CD process and deploy. And then the journey starts again with users interacting and complaining about the software. And this process is a continuous evolution. And depending on your organization, you may be only responsible for certain steps, or you may have to own the whole process. But no matter who you are, it's important to understand like where you are in the development chain. And so the evolving landscape, and this is just like my opinion. And when it comes to AI, it has the greatest opportunity at certain points in the engineering process. I should qualify that these are areas that we've seen yield the best results when incorporating LLM. Writing code, testing, and the pull request creation and merging process are all areas where AI enables you to move a lot faster. And when it comes to the yellow areas, these are often more organizational in nature and reflect more senior skill set. And if you're more junior as it relates to being like an engineer, these are areas that you want to get the reps in, and you shouldn't offload them to the machine um, so you're going to miss out on that learning.
Yeah.
And then for the red, these are areas that are pretty risky to subject to the overwhelming midness of AI. And if you respect the craft, you should be doing or directing these actions directly.
Yeah. And I wanted to call out that on that last diagram, this is like a snapshot in time right now. This is where we're finding these LLMs perform the best. But there are also people on social media who are touting that like every single piece of the puzzle can be solved by LLMs. And we're still kind of like trying to figure out what is best. I think like what I'm noticing as well is like the PR review process is the biggest bottleneck right now when we have a lot of LLM generated code. But it's like still evolving and we're trying to figure it out.
I don't know. It just feels like so disrespectful if someone gives you a PR that's like 10,000 added lines, and
Yeah.
it's like you probably didn't look at this. That's but that's just me. And then when it comes to the best practices, you don't need to have the perfect setup immediately. You the the way that like we've found is incrementally implementing AI where you feel the greatest pain and where you feel you can get the greatest leverage. And we found that like when implementing guardrails around your LLM development process, a solid planning and testing foundation yields the best results from creating these and that prevents you from ending up with this like slop super spreader that can happen with these LLMs. And then of course, like if you have a Claude artifact or skill or agents file that works really well for you, share it across your team so they can benefit from it as well. And the fundamentals of software engineering are more important than ever, and they will probably continue to be important. And like one of the coolest things I've noticed about this brave new world of AI is the ability to do asynchronous work. I remember during the break, I was sick again, and I was on the couch and I was actually like creating PRs from using Claude Code on my phone. And I was only able to do that because I had a lot of good Claude abstractions for the project I was working on. So I was able to make progress without having to be locked into my desk setup, which really opens a lot of capabilities.
Cool. And there's actually a typo in this slide. I fixed it this morning, but it didn't get picked up. But one thing I just wanted to call out in working with like these different parts of the software development lifecycle is that composition of tools and using terminal applications works extremely well with these LLMs. And that's something that's been really exciting for me. So like when I'm doing my flow, I use like the GitHub CLI, and I have a linear CLI for task tracking. And for these different stages, the composition of those tools is something that's been a huge differentiator with tools like Claude Code versus other LLM providers. And that's something that's really exciting in this development. Yeah, but there
Yeah.
are a lot of pitfalls that you have to consider with working with these tools. We talked already about just like throwing a huge PR over the wall to somebody and having you review it. I think this post by Joe Reese encapsulates that kind of behavior pretty well. And it's something to be considerate of is this dawn of the brain rotted zombies where somebody can just become like a button pusher and they just click accept, accept, accept while they're using these LLM tools. So it's really important to be cognizant of like the code you're producing and like what you're building and not just have this like black box of who knows what underneath the hood. And it's good to understand like what you're doing and what you're building and not just have Claude plan it and implement it and test it and deploy it and everything along the way.
Yeah, and there's doing the work and there's doing the work. So like a lot of things you see on like Twitter these days is around like the AI hype and how you can do all this crazy stuff and ship immense amount of codes. And like these people that post these things, they never actually share what they ship, which is I don't know, I think that's interesting. And like you got to remember like as engineers we're here to solve problems and not just like write a bunch of slop code. And as I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, like it's almost like a truism at this point that like writing the code was never the hard part. The hard part was often understanding what the user actually wants and how to handle the resourcing and the architectural decisions, whether you build versus buy. There was always so much more to being an engineer than just coding. And I think we need to remember that. And to kind of reiterate what I was talking about, you see a lot of people with these crazy like parallel agents, with like sub agents for all these different tasks that burn an immense amount of tokens. I don't see how they can possibly be economical. But at some point, you actually need to do something and not just optimize your LLM setup, even though it is very fun to optimize your LLM setup. Remember what we're here for. And not to be a Debbie Downer, but the less glamorous work of being an engineer is is still going to be important. So that's like writing and reading docs, the actual maintaining of software. I'm sure as all of us know, when someone it's pretty easy to get to V1 on a project, but it's the maintenance of that software that is a challenge. And I think if you've ever worked in an open source project, you can you feel this pain. And the collaboration like within the team and with like external stakeholders is always a challenge. And having a good review culture where people are actually taking the time to do thoughtful reviews and not just saying let's get that money. Who amongst us hasn't rubber stamped a PR? But I think having a culture where you review PRs fast and that you also take the time to do it is going to continue to be important as we move forward. And something I try to do, maybe on the weekends when I'm not under a deadline, is I'll write code the old-fashioned way without any LLMs, and I find that it like keeps me sharp. And I think there's some articles and research out there that prolonged LLM use does degrade your cognitive abilities. So that's just something to be aware of as we enter this brave new world.
Yeah, so Alex brought up a lot of great points about this real push to optimize your individual AI workflows. But the one thing to kind of also remember is that software development is really a team effort. And as much as possible, you really want to get centralize what's important to your organization. So if you want to go on to the next slide. You can see that just like if you do everything just in parallel or completely independent of each other, you really still have what we were talking about of that real bottleneck around just PR review and enforcing standards. And as much as possible, you want to move those conversations upstream to the being enforced within the initial development with your agent. And then really what gets sent downstream is just something that you know already adheres to what your organization cares about in terms of coding standards. So if you want to move on, because this really, again, just avoids a lot of the tedium of getting those 1,000-line PRs that you don't really have to go through it just for stylistic things. So recently we put out a blog post called Dignified Python, which is our internal kind of what we care about when we code in Python. Because as we're saying, if you just defer everything to your LLM, you kind of just get this basic kind of just median approach to Python. And Python's so flexible. There's a lot of different ways to write code, and not necessarily everything that works and just passes is really the way you want to be coding in production. So this was a really popular post since I think it hit a nerve with what a lot of people are seeing. And then we've just released another post yesterday that's kind of a similar vein of just how we approach testing with our agents, which is a slightly more complicated workflow, but again, is just kind of how you can make sure that the tests that get written along with your code works as expected. So just to talk about kind of dignified Python, these are really just rules that are, I would say, specific to Dagster, but are just quality Python. I was telling my friend about this post, and I was like, oh, we put out a post on AI Python coding standards, and he read it, and he just went, this is just idiomatic Python. This isn't an AI post. But really, at the root of this is just a collection of rules that within our skills, you can see that they're just really free text of when we need to be applying them, because that's what the agent needs to know, is just when to look for these patterns. So if you can see just for things like exception handling, of just when to use this pattern, and then also just a little snippet of when it's useful, what it should look like, and how we should be approaching it. So this is somewhat easy with just these individual Python rules, but it gets a little bit more complicated for workflows like testing. So yeah, that's just a little bit more about the rules. But so for testing, we need to be a little bit more prescriptive on not just when tests should be written, but also more of a process of the difference between tests for feature development versus bug fixes, since there's just kind of a different pattern of how we want to be testing our software. And then for when we're adding new code and doing new features, we have to have an entirely different approach of what type of tests we want to add. So this, again, is somewhat specific to the repository, but we can walk through just, and the blog post goes into a lot more details about this, of just this applied to a specific repository. But how we do this is we break it out into really a table of the various tests that exist within the table, their location within the directories of the repository. And then the most important thing is just a distribution of what those tests are, of that we want that the majority of our tests should be just these quick unit tests that test business logic, and want some coverage for things like integration tests and smoke tests, but those will just be a small subset of the overall tests. Because if you just leave an agent to design codes on or tests on its own, it will just do this all over the place, put it all in the same file, and it becomes much harder to test things as they just live next to each other, and you kind of can't really as easily independently run integration tests from unit tests and things like that. And you can also be much more prescriptive on things like, okay, for the overall unit tests, collectively, these should never take longer than, say, 3 seconds to run, as opposed to integration tests, which might have more setup that may take longer, but maybe run less often. So this overall table, taken all together, ends up being really a decision tree of when certain levels of testing should be applied to the code we generate. So you can just kind of break down that if it uses certain infrastructure, if it should be using mocks or things like that, or if it should be using implementation of our infrastructure, and then it just ends up in one of these layers of testing. And so this is just really helpful because you can be very prescriptive, but we've seen that in writing skills and rules for our LLMs, you don't need to just try and kind of one-shot this all in one large doc. You can kind of just, as long as the documentation knows where to route things, you can be very specific in those individual paths. So it doesn't have to ingest everything every time it's running, but just knows what little section it needs to review in order to apply certain testing and things like that. And that's just like what a testing rule looks like, kind of what we're talking about, of its purpose, where it should end up, and just kind of the overall process of how it should write a test for something like that.
Cool. Yeah, so Dennis talked about some of like our lessons learned and like general guidance and rules for writing Python code. And now you might be wondering, how can you use this and how can you incorporate this into the different LLM tools that you're using? And something that's really exciting and the front runner in how people are like injecting this kind of context into your AI assistants is through skills. And my go-to tool right now is Claude Code. And they actually introduced a way to write plugins, which is a collection of skills and commands. But the good news is these skills can also be used with other tools as well, like Cursor. But we have this repo here called Dagster Claude Plugins. And it actually is a repository for all of these skills that we've been working on to use with Dagster. And as you can see in the README here, within Claude Code, it's really easy to install just by using the /plugin command. So you can say plugin marketplace add, and you give it the name of the repository. So Dagster.io /Dagster Claude plugins. And if you go to the next slide, we can talk about, well, here's what you would see inside of Claude. So you can see Claude comes with official plugins. And then once you add that marketplace, they call them, you can get that collection of plugins to show up here. And once that marketplace is added, you can see we have 4 different plugins available right now, but we're working on this to expand it. Right now we include, sorry, if you could go back, we have Dignified Python, and this is that like best practices recommendations for writing Python code. That first blog post that Dennis shared is included in here, all of those rules, as well as like the testing recommendations. And then we have Dagster conventions, which is how you would structure your data pipelines, do ETL, do things like that. And then we also have a plugin for all of our integrations. So Claude might need to know how to use the DBT integration and how to use a component versus DBT assets and things like that. We have all of that encoded in this integrations plugin. And then finally, we have one just for DG. And this includes more so like commands. So we have a DG prototype command that you can use to reference all these other skills and like build a pipeline and prototype it for you, which is really exciting. And then now we can talk through kind of like a little bit of what each of these plugins include. I mentioned the prototype command. We also have like a way to troubleshoot Dagster runs with a command. And this one's more for like Dagster plus instances, but it'll hit the GraphQL API, get the logs for a given run. Because you're running Claude within your code base, you also have the context of all the code that is being used, and it can try to determine what is wrong with a given pipeline and come up with a solution for it. We also have that ways to create projects and really constantly expanding the available commands within this plugin. Then we have Dagster conventions. In addition to like the ETL pipelines, we also have like information on how to use sensors and schedules and resources. And something that's really interesting with these conventions is this is all information that we already had in our documentation. So for example, we have like general guidance for humans on how to write a job, but now we need to be able to condense that and compact that information such that an LLM can use it and be efficient in using it without polluting the context. So we are writing these processes that will translate our documentation, GitHub issues, all these different sources into skills for Claude. And so this is just a quick example of like what like our jobs recommendation is. If you go to the next one, here's just a quick reference of how you would use schedules. And one more. And then here's just like declarative automation. So all of this information becomes available to Claude. Really quickly, I see somebody in the chat asking about plugins versus MCP servers. I actually prototyped an MCP server probably like a year ago or so. And I have honestly found that just like composing command line tools is working much better for me than MCP servers. I think MCP servers have a place if like they're running on a server with like your Dagster instance or some other infrastructure. But even then, if you have like the DG CLI, we have in the DG CLI an API subcommand. So it's like DG API assets. And then you have access to like all of the server calls for assets to hit that same instance. MCPs also could have like persistence of data on the server side, but I don't know. I've found CLIs to work better so far for me. Next slide. Yeah, so I talked about the integrations as well. So we, similarly to the conventions, we have taken all of our documentation for these different integrations, and we kind of like categorize them, instruct Claude on when you would use what. So if you're like doing BI, you could consider using the Looker, Tableau, Power BI, Sigma integrations. And then each one of these integrations also has like a full reference within the skill. Just as a quick example, here is an example of the DBT documentation for the skill. And you can see that we're recommending like this component-based approach where you just have like a little YAML file and you can configure in like a DBT project in this like remote repo. But there are other ways to use the DBT integration as well, and that's also encoded in the skill. And then finally, seemingly people's favorite is the dignified Python. And this is like all of our lessons learned as an organization working on Dagster, the product itself, on like how we like to write Python code. And that's available in this Claude marketplace as well. One last thing I wanted to wrap up when talking about like these skills is kind of like the elephant in the room with these skills is like keeping them up to date. Right now, where we have semantic versioning and we're constantly like releasing it and trying to keep it up to date, but we're in the process of building what we're calling like context pipelines. And those are powered by Dagster. But like you could imagine every time a new version of Dagster is released, we want to like parse that changelog, see what's actually changed, and then go and update all these skills. Actually, somebody just asked about supporting different Dagster versions. Yeah, exactly. So we're trying to maintain these skills and have like a matching semantic versioning pinned to like the Dagster version, but that's something that we're still in the process of doing. But that's it. Yeah, I'm really excited to share the Claude plugins. And just to reiterate, like these are also compatible with other LLM tools as well. But we're totally open to like contributions, changes, and feedback as people explore using these.
Sweet. So I'm gonna kick us off into a demo. So I have this project here that I used in a blog post a few weeks ago. But basically what I have here is a project that pulls data in from Hacker News, And then uses Snoeflake's Cortex to do some light LLM analysis, like entity abstraction and sentiment analysis, that type of thing. But I want to enhance this and use and bring in Reddit posts from r/data engineering. So I have this generic Reddit web scraping class here. Yeah. That has like all sorts of things that you would want to have in a good web scraper so you stay below the radar. So we have some like delay, different user agents here, pulling the metadata from the site, and as well as the posts and the comments. And I'm going to create a plan here to turn this class into a pipeline. And for demo purposes, I'm just going to scrape the top one post. I want to load them into Snowflake and use Cortex. Do I need to zoom in at all?
I think it looks good. Maybe like one more notch in. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to summarize the post and its comments. I want to use this resource. And add the raw asset. And then for the as I'm thinking about the data model here, I want the Reddit comments for the thread shoved into a JSON object in the same row as the post. So I got to type that out.
And while you're typing this, I just wanted to call out like some people in the comments talking about using open code or other tools and not just Claude Code. In this demo, you can see Alex is using Cursor, but it's still making use of the skills. And I think like at the end of the day with these LLMs, the most important thing is just having some form of context that they can reference, which just is like another form of documentation. It's just that this one is read by agents and not by humans.
Yeah, and then I'm just adding more instructions for the metadata. And like Colton says, in your cursor rules, you can have it include the Claude files. And I have the same plugins here that we talked about in the presentation. So I'm going to kick off a plan. I'm using Opus because we're not messing around today. And let's see what plan we get from this. Yeah, and as we're going here, we can probably answer some questions as we're letting Opus kind of turn over here.
Cool. We actually do have a question in the Q&A while this is churning. Yeah, we have a question about when LLMs violate rules. For example, I've got a rule that when writing SQL, it should never alias tables, views, CTEs with single letter aliases, and it breaks the rule all the time. Yeah, this is something that we've struggled with as well. There's like the concept of tripwires. I don't know if this is relevant to this, but like there's ways to enforce when different prompts are used, or like these different like skills are used, and like you can enforce when it's used, but it seems like sometimes it still has a mind of its own. I think like there's also ways to have like post hooks with Claude, and like having a prompt that at the end can do some form of validation is important. So you could have like a post hook prompt of like ensure that this like rule isn't being broken, and that can help a lot. And then I think another one that's like really helpful is having traditional linting that is more deterministic. So when you're writing SQL, you could imagine using a tool called like SQL Fluff, which is a SQL linter, and you could have a rule to not allow single letter aliases, and then that could also be a post hook. So whenever your LLM tool finishes, it'll run this post hook that runs a linter, and then it'll violate that rule, and then it'll know to go back and fix it. So I think like a composition of your like skills that you're using and then like traditional linting is really powerful.
I think it's also really good to just be very explicit with your rules of when to use, just so you're limiting what all needs to actually be taken into account for specific situations, rather than just kind of large, all-encompassing kind of rule sets. Because like we were saying, we define ours pretty narrowly, but have just much more sophisticated use cases of just like when it should be looked up and loaded.
Yeah, and so here's the plan here. And we have a nice mermaid architecture diagram here, which is like a copy of the Hacker News pipeline, but with a different source. It's going through all the assets here as far as like the schema, the logic, the metadata, and it's currently building it right now on the side here. But this plan seems pretty good to me. And like a good little engineer, I'll actually look at the code that's being generated here. I do notice that LMs are like pretty verbose as they write things and throw a lot of this comment isn't necessary. I don't know. I feel like we don't need comments anymore, but that's just my perspective. Then we have a merge statement here.
And it is wild to think like a year and a half ago, like demonstrating this would be pretty mind blowing, but like things have evolved so fast. And like the amount of skepticism around kind of like this kind of tooling is really fading. It's super impressive. I like the way I think data pipelines are going to be written in the future is just so different than what it has been for the past decade.
Okay, so we have that there. Let's check our defs. Moment of truth.
And really quickly, there's another question about if we plan on supporting Python 3.14 anytime soon. We actually do in the Dagster core framework in our integrations. That landed maybe a month or two ago, but the Claude skill, I think we still limit that to 3.13, but we have plans to upgrade it to 3.14 as well.
All right, so the defs came through clean. I'm going to fire up the UI. Make this happen. So we have the Reddit posts asset over here. Let's see how it does. Yeah, when I was testing this out this morning, I went for like the top 20 posts, and because of like my web scraping timing logic, it took like 15 minutes. So we're just gonna do one post. The certification scam. Wonder what that could be about.
We have an interesting question here from Peter saying, and by the way, can I answer questions right now or while this runs?
Yeah.
Okay. He said, we've implemented an asset factory pattern to abstract the conventions we want our data scientists to follow. How would we best get Claude Code to understand this when creating new pipelines? Components, CloudMD files? What's actually really interesting about this is when I was working on our official Claude skills, the way I had those skills written was with Claude. So I like pointed it to some of our best practices examples and like data pipelines. And I was like, hey, try to extract the meaningful patterns from this and put it into a markdown file as a skill. And you could do the same thing where you have your existing code base and you can learn from it and produce a skill. And I suggest just putting it into some kind of markdown file that's generic and usable by the different LLM providers. And then you can get fancy, and as like people create PRs, you could have like a GitHub action that automatically takes the lessons learned from that PR and tries to update the Claude skill too. And you can have like these evolving skills that's like organic and live alongside your code base as you make developments. But it's a very meta thing, but you could totally have Claude or these other tools inspect and learn from your code and establish the best practices for your team. And then it can read from that and kind of like be this self-contained machine.
Yeah, so we ran into a timestamp issue with Snowflake. Opus changed how it was processing that. As we all know, as data engineers, dealing with date time is always a pain in the butt. Okay, so I also asked Claude if we need to update any of the downstream assets. So let's try running this guy again. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, while this is running, Jeff asked, or Geoff, Jeff, it said, would this typically be how you would develop? Are you just running the pipeline, or would you read through the generated asset checks first? And I think like it depends on the person. I think I would like recommend reading through the code and understanding it, and also having the LLM produce unit tests or integration tests as well, and run those. But if you're working with like a simple data source, running it and actually looking at the data is totally viable as long as you don't have like permissions issues. Dennis or Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful now with also a lot of the checking that just exists in DG of just always being able to make sure that your project is valid before you actually run anything. Just being able to just do all those quick checks, but I'm old fashioned. I would look through it before just hidden materialize, but I don't know. Maybe I just need to
Yeah,
be.
I guess I'm on the new school side of things where like also it isn't very entertaining for a deep dive to just like watch me read the code here. But we had a SQL error here. Claude's gonna spin on that for a little bit. Right. Let's give this another go.
Evan was asking, how do you recommend using these tools for larger code locations or code bases? Would you let it create a markdown file per big folder? I think actually this is a really good question. And like a pattern that we're seeing emerge for these skills is kind of like a hierarchical pattern where you have like a single markdown file that acts as an index. And you can see this for our integrations skill where we have a markdown file that is talking about like which integrations are for which domain. And then those are broken down and they kind of like are these nested patterns so that like the skill only has to reference like the top level one and then can dig in and not pollute the context. So I think like summary files are really important, but we also work in a mono repo with a ton of code, and I've used like single skills that kind of like scan everything, and that has been working well too. But yeah, I think hierarchical skills are definitely a pattern we're seeing.
All right. So only let's see how many. Only 1 out of 3 ain't bad. So let's go upstream and keep going.
Tom asked, is there a Claude skill to create custom scaffold templates based on existing code? I think that's an interesting concept. I think in some ways, a Claude skill doesn't have to be created for this. Like the DG command line can explain like the scaffold templates themselves and like the schema of that. So you could potentially have like a generic skill for this, but I don't know. It's something that I think it'd be fun to explore. If this is something you're interested in, for that Claude plugin repo that we shared earlier, I'll link it again. If you wanted to open an issue or kind of like talk about your use case that we want to support, you totally could, and we can play around with that.
Yeah, and then we're moving next step into this pipeline here for some entity extraction. And when I mean entities, this is like company names, tool usage, stuff like that. Yeah, so it looks like, hey, Dagster was mentioned. Hope it wasn't related to this. And then I think we got one more. Sorry for the voice crack.
We do have an official MCP server, but it's hidden. We had mixed results with using it, and this was mentioned earlier too, but we have found like composition of command line utilities to work better than MCP servers for the use cases that we're supporting right now. So I would encourage that over the MCP server at this point in time, but we can bring it back and work on it. But it's in the open source Dagster repo if you wanted to look at it.
All right. So it looks like our little Reddit pipeline here worked pretty good.
Nice.
So everything ran through. Pop back into cursor. And then I'm going to ask it to follow our dignified Python standards.
Nice. And I've been admittedly a little bit distracted answering questions. Can you summarize the pipeline, Alex, what we built here?
Yeah, so this pipeline takes in raw Reddit posts through web scraping. And then we do sentiment analysis on those posts. We extract the entities that are mentioned, like company names, tool usage in those posts or comments. And then we create a summary for the day. And this all runs in one pipeline.
Nice.
And it runs in parallel with this Hacker News pipeline we have here. And for the demo of the project, we also included a DBT project here. But I will drop the repo link right here.
Nice.
But I think we can move into the Q&A.
Yeah, I think we cover most. Actually, can you show the slide before that one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so we shared the links a few times already, but we hope you learned something interesting. We shared our Claude skills that are constantly evolving, that we're building. We demonstrated how to use these skills to build a Dagster pipeline. Again, if you have any feedback on these, or if like you try using it and it's not working perfectly for your use case, definitely open up a GitHub issue and we'll try to address it. We also have an upcoming webinar on how we use Compass for AI analytics internally, which is really exciting. And then I also wanted to call out the Dagster University course that Dennis has been working on, and it's still one of the like best things to reference if you're learning Dagster. If you're writing the code yourself or if you're using AI to produce the code, it's still good to understand how it works, and the Dagster University course can help you with that.
Yeah, and
Great.
also a lot of what's kind of gone into the plugin comes from just the content we've generated over the last couple of years. So a lot of the specifics of testing with Dagster in the plugin comes from the course. So you can, again, this is just everything we've been working on that's been successful has kind of just been instilled into the plugin.
Yep. Cool. So we do have a few more questions. I think we have time. Well, we don't have too much time, but we can answer a couple. So let's see. John said it'd be great if you have blogs or articles to go along with the Dagster Open Platform repo. That's a good idea, actually. So if people don't know, Dagster Open Platform is our internal data pipeline where we use Dagster internally for all of our own DBT modeling and data processing. We had a blog post way back on that, I think, but it's probably due for an upgrade. So that's a good call, John. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, Dennis, this person asked, which of the Dagster University courses covers testing in Dagster? It's actually not listed in this screenshot, but it's called, I think, like Dagster testing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not in this screenshot, that's all. But yeah, there's a separate course for it.
Yeah. So that has, I would say that's a great course of if you're wanted just the overview of when to use different testing strategies. But then also does have some of the Dagster specifics of how to really write quality tests for some of the different objects in Dagster, that just some of which have just their own little ways to set them up properly and things like that.
Cool. Somebody asked, is more support coming for SQL Mesh? I don't know about that. There's the community integration, but with the SQL Mesh acquisition, I don't really know what the status of SQL Mesh is, to be honest. But that's just me not being up to date on things. I'd be curious to learn more about the development of that. Dennis or Alex, do you know? Have you been following much?
I haven't heard too much.
All right. Not
Yeah. I don't know. It's funny. I'm wearing my SQL Mesh shirt today.
Oh, no.
But I don't have any information about the integration status.
Sorry, Stephen. Kevin asked, do you guys share these Claude rules and skills across all internal repos so everybody uses similar AI? Yes. Yeah. So like internally at Dagster, we check in some skills to our repos that we're working in so that everybody is sharing these kinds of like best practices. But then again, people do also like install their own custom ones, but I think sharing it is pretty helpful for collaborating. Maybe one or two more. This user asked, how confident should we be to have an LLM convert an existing ops-based pipeline to an assets-based pipeline? Interesting. Do one of you want to answer that?
Only one way to find out.
Yeah, I think I would be pretty confident. I think translating things is one of the superpowers of these LLMs and like one of the original use cases for them. What I would suggest though is to have thorough validation in like the output that's being produced. So you could have like a data snapshot for the ops-based pipeline and then a data snapshot for the new asset one. You can do a diff of the data to make sure it actually did translate it adequately. But I would be pretty confident in that.
Yeah, actually, I've recently been working on refactoring our like Stargazer, like the fake GitHub stars analysis pipeline, and that uses ops and moving it over to assets. And I use the plugins that we demonstrated in this deep dive, and it like it didn't quite one shot it, but after like 3 or 4 iterations, it was able to get it to a point where it was using like modern Dagster conventions. So I think it would depend on like how big and complex your legacy Dagster pipelines are. But I don't know, like I said, there's only one way to find out.
Well, I think that's it for time. There are a couple more questions, but we like you can hop on Slack and we can follow up there if you have any more questions. But yeah, thank you all for joining. This was a super exciting one. As a reminder, this will be recorded and put on the YouTube channel. But yeah, once again, thanks everyone.